Welcome student, today we will learn about the array and functions. So now our unit is first, module third. There are some contents in which today we will learn introduction to two-dimensional array, declaration syntax of two-dimensional array, initializing a two-dimensional array, initializing an unsigned two-dimensional array, and accessing element in two-dimensional array, inputting values into two-dimensional array. Next point is writing values from two-dimensional array and memory address calculation in two-dimensional array. Introductions to functions, advantages of function and type of the functions. These are the contents of our today lecture. Now, introduction to two-dimensional array. Basically, we know that an array is a collection of homogeneous data type stored in continuous memory locations. An array having two subscripts is known as two-dimensional array. Two-dimensional array is arrangement of elements in rows and columns. It has two indexes, one for row and other for column. So, two-dimensional array is defined by having two indexes, one index for row and second index for columns. We also use two-dimensional array to create the mathematical matrices, or in other words, we can say that two-dimensional array is basically applied for the problems associated or related to the matrix pattern. Now, declarations syntax of two-dimensional array. So, there is a syntax. First we define the two-dimensional array. So, first we have to use the data type, then we use the array name, and there is used two subscripts. First subscript is used for the row size and second is used for the column size. This row size and column size always have an integer value. For example, we declare here an array int AR, rows is 4 and column is 4. So, as we declare this two-dimensional array, there is a memory mapping in the memory. So, we can say this memory mapping is done using the rows and columns. Here, this is the rows and this is the column. Here, each cell is allotted in terms of the bytes according to the data type. For example, here we are using integer type array elements, so each cell is consumed by 2 bytes. Now, here as we declare here int AR, rows 4 and column 4, so data types are here integer type, array name is AR, number of rows is 4 and number of column is 4. Now, next point is initializing a two-dimensional array. A two-dimensional array can be initialized by using the curly brackets. First, we understand what is the initializing. Basically, when we declare any type of array, at the time of declaring, allowing some values is known as initializing the array. Here, we declare two-dimensional array int AR, rows are 4 and columns are 4, and we initialize these values, assign these values. So, this assignment is known as a row-wise assignment. Here, element 10 and 15 denote the row first, and 2 and 5 denote row second, 7 and 9 denote row third, and similarly 10 and 20 denote row 4. The other method or second method of initializing two-dimensional array is use the curly bracket only starting and endings, and we use a comma put any elements. Now, next point is initializing an unsigned two-dimensional array. When in such type of initializing, we basically skip the row index and we gives the value to the column index. For example, we can see here int AR, the row script is a row subscript is a skip and column subscript have the value and we initialize this data. Here we can observe that here number of columns are 2 and number of rows are automatically determined by the compiler based the number of elements supplied. So, number of elements supplied is here. So, he automatically will text the 4 rows. Next topic is accessing elements in two-dimensional array. Basically, accessing means taking the accessing or getting each element one by one from the two-dimensional array is known as the accessing elements in two-dimensional array. In two-dimensional array, each element is accessed by using two indexes. In two-dimensional array, each element has two index number, one for row and other for column, and each start from 0. For accessing any element from array, we specify the array name along with row index and column index inside the square bracket format. For example, we see here. Now, we declare a 4 cross 4 matrix array int array name is AR and we use 4 cross 4 matrix. Now, suppose as we declare such statement, then the memory is mapped according or created according the given diagram. In this two-dimensional array, if we want to access the specific element, suppose we want to access the element 5. So, to access this element, I have to use two indexes, values for I and values for j. Here value for I is 1 and value for j equals to 1. So, AR11 denote the element 5 and as I will print AR11, he will automatically print the value 5. So, we can access this element. Similarly, suppose we want to access the element 10. For this element, we have two identifier, row identifier and column identifier. So, values of I equals to 2 and value of j equals to 1. So, row index denote I and j index denote column. So, value of I equals to 2 and value of j equals to 1. So, we can access this element. It means AR21 will provide the element 10. So, using this method, we can access each elements of two-dimensional array. Now, next topic is inputting value into the two-dimensional array. As we know that an array is basically get the continue memory location. So, to give the value this continue memory, we always need the for loops. So, this is two-dimensional array. So, to getting the input, we always need two for loops, in which the first for loop is used for the row index and second for loop is used for the column index. This row index is also known as a outer for loop and the column index is also known as a inner for loop. Basically, this outer for loop control the inner for loop. Now, next point is writing the values from the two-dimensional array. As we know that array always use the consecutive memory location. So, if we want to access the elements of array one by one, then we need to use the for loop. So, when we want to write the values from two-dimensional array, we use double for loop. For example, we take and two-dimensional array int AR4 2. Here number of rows are 4 and number of columns are 2, and these are initialized by this value. Now we want to access one by one element. For access this one by one element, we basically use two for loop. This for loop is known as a outer for loop, and this is basically used for the rows, and this for loop is known as the inner for loop, and this for loop basically used to denote the columns. Now, memory address calculation in two-dimensional array. As we know that two-dimensional array is basically a row column arrangement, and when we declare any two-dimensional array, then he will arrange in such a way. Suppose I want to declare an array having 3 rows and 4 columns, and we give some values to here. So the array will take such type of memory allocations. Now, row-wise and column-wise arrangement of two-dimensional array is mentioned here. So when we arrange the two-dimensional array, the row-wise arrangement basically denote the puttings in a linear forms of the all rows, and column-wise arrangement is consider the putting the elements of array in a linear way using the columns. Now, calculating the address of an element of two-dimensional array. Suppose I want to calculate the address of ai and j, where I and j basically introduce the index values of row and j denote the index value of column. So first we consider row-wise measurement. So according to the row-wise measurement, if I want to take the address of a specific element, assume ai and aj. So to calculate this address, I have to first determine the base address of two-dimensional array, then plus w is the width and size of each element, and multiply n is number of columns, and I denote the row index, and LR basically denote the lower limit of row, and J denote the column index, and LC basically denote the lower limit of column. So basically to calculate the Aij, it means a specific address of a cell, then we use the formula B plus W multiply N into I minus LR plus J minus LC. Similarly, if we want to calculate the address using the column measure system or column arrangement, then we use the formula to getting the address of a specific cell B plus W I minus LR plus M into J minus LC. Now there is some abbreviation like as B, W, N, I, LR, J and C. So these abbreviations are described here. Here B stand for base address, I basically row script of element whose address is to be found, J denote column subscript of element whose address is to be found, and W denote the storage size of each one element stored in array. LR basically denote the lower limit of rows or starting row index of matrix, and LC denote the lower limit of column, and M denote the number of rows, and N denote the number of columns in the matrix. Now our next topic is functions. So first we define what is the function. Function is a subprogram of a program used to perform a specific task and is executed individually. In other words, we can say basically function is a self-containing block which are used to perform a specific task. The other definition is that dividing a large program into basic building blocks is known as a function. Now we consider why we use the function and what are the basic concept behind the function. So there are some logics which introduce us the basic concept of the functions. First one is that when we write a program to solve a large program, we divide that large program into smaller subprograms and are solved individually to make the program easier. Second concept is that dividing concept is implemented using the function. Functions are used to divide a large program into the smaller subprograms such that program become easy to understand and easy to implement. So to break down a large program into the sub problems, because we cannot immediately or we cannot simultaneously solve a large problem, so we have to divide this problem into the sub problems. Now what are the advantages of using the functions? So first advantage is that using function we can implement modular programming. Second advantage, function make the program more readable and understandable. Using function, the program implementation becomes easy. Once a function is created, it can be used many times. That is also known as a code reusability. And using the function, a larger program can be divided into a smaller module. Now, types of the function. There are basically two types of the function. First one is system defined function and second one is user defined function. So what is the system defined functions? Basically those functions which are defined by the system is known as a system defined functions. The system defined functions are also called as a library function, a standard function or predefined function. System defined functions are defined inside the header files like as a studio.h, conio.h, maths.h, string.h, etc. So we can say that the system defined functions definition is defined in the corresponding library and they are inbuilt in the system libraries. Example of the system defined functions are printf, scanf and square roots. These functions are the system defined function. In the system defined functions, user cannot make any type of the change. Second one is the user defined functions. The user defined function, the functions whose definition is defined by the user is known as a user defined function. Every user defined function must be declared and implemented. Whenever we make function call, the function definition get executed. Example of user defined functions are the main function as we use in the C languages. The function main is implemented by the user, so it is called as user defined function.